Hello, this is Kyle, also known as AlienTude, and today I am reviewing the Tsurodoi from Romance of Min, an Unokubi Zukuri katana. So for a bit of background here, I've done a few other reviews of Romance of Min katana, and if you want to know more about the company, I encourage you to check out those reviews. The links will be in the description. This one retails for $189, although the website has always had it marked down to $155. I've never seen it higher than that, and I've been looking since Romance of Min sent this to me as a review sample. So I am going to review it as $155, but do keep in mind that the list price is technically $189, and it's conceivable it won't always be on discount to $155. Now the listing says this is a spring steel through hardened katana, but it doesn't say what the steel type is. I would guess probably something pretty similar to 5160. It's listed at 53 HRC hardness, but I don't really have a way to test that. And it's also listed as extra sharp. Now let's talk about what to expect at that $155 price point. That is very low for a functional sword, and you can really only find katana in that price range. There's some others, some tactical style swords that you can sometimes find in that price range, but generally speaking, if you're talking about historically inspired swords, katana are where it's at for this low-end budget price. And at that price, I expect flaws. I expect compromises. You know, just like I said in the Cold Steel Hand and a Half review I did 2 weeks ago, anything in the lower budget price is going to be an exercise in what compromises can be made while still delivering a functional sword. What I expect out of a katana at this price point is reliability and functionality. It doesn't need to be particularly attractive. It doesn't need to have, through hard, or it doesn't have to be differentially hardened. You know, accuracy to specific katana types can be a little bit less, but it needs to be functional and reliable. To me, the big hallmarks for that are going to be in the hilt construction, how tight everything is, how soundly everything is secured. That's going to be one of the most important things to me, because it's what makes the sword functional is the construction style, the heat treat, all that kind of stuff. But if it's poorly constructed in the hilt, it's not going to stay functional for long. So that's what I'm looking for. I can forgive a lot more flaws at this price point than from something in the $400, $500, $600 plus price range. The saya here is a relatively simple one. It's got a glossy black lacquer and then this kind of red speckled finish towards the upper half of it. There's not a lot of taper to it in any dimension, which is kind of to be expected at this price point. The Koiguchi, Kurigata, and Kojiri are just wood. There's no buffalo horn anywhere. And you can see I've undid the presentation knot of the Sugeo. In addition, I took the Shidodome out. They are the most bog standard Shidodome you're going to see. And since when I unwrapped the presentation knot, the Shidodome were not glued in there, they came loose, so that's why I took them off. The lacquer on here does show fingerprints quite easily, not uncommon. It's pretty evenly applied though. I don't really feel much rippling or anything. This speckled area does have a little bit of texture to it, but not a lot. And kind of unusual is when I undid the presentation knot, there's no trace of the Sugeo in the lacquer. Oftentimes what will happen is they'll put that presentation knot on before the lacquer is fully cured, and it'll leave an impression in there. Not the case here. The fit of the katana to the saya is not good, as you can probably see here. This is as far as it will go in naturally. I could probably force it in a little bit more, but then it would likely get stuck, and I don't want that. This is better than when I got it though. When I first got it, it got stuck right about there. And it's loosened up a little bit. I left the saya and katana separated to let the wood acclimate to the climate here, and that seemed to improve it a little bit. I can say though that the sticking point is definitely in the Koiguchi right in here. So all it would take is a little bit of filing the wood down, and this would fit in pretty nicely, I think. That's a lot better than if the fit is problematic somewhere down here, because there's really not much you can do about that. So this would be pretty easily fixable. The one other kind of weird thing to mention about this saya is that the wood in the Koiguchi has this really weird blue tint to it, and I'm not sure what it is. It looks like mold. It's not. I can feel in there, and it's not mold. I don't know what it is, but it's got this weird blue look that doesn't look appealing. Let's take a look at the Suka, the various Koshirai, basically all the parts of the blade that are not the blade. Let's start with the Kashira here. I believe it and the other fittings, except maybe the Habaki, are copper. The listing of the sword says that the Tsuba is copper, and I'm guessing the other parts are as well. The pattern on the Kashira is kind of a little bit of an odd texture. Kind of reminds me of Roots, honestly. And there is a little swirly Mitsudomi on here. I'm sure Matthew Jensen appreciates that design. Now, I'm glad that these are copper, if that's what they are, because it's a traditional material for the Koshirai, and it's a lot better than what you see on a lot of swords in this general price range, which would be an alloy, which is going to generally be a zinc alloy, which is just bottom of the barrel, not durable, and generally just doesn't look good either. Seeing something as copper, that's a much better material. The casting quality on the Kashira is actually pretty well done. I can see some small flaws here and there, but there's a decent amount of detail, and the lines are pretty crisp, and there's very little to see where they cleaned up the casting lines. If I look really closely, I can see a little bit of a flatter surface there, but they did a good job on cleaning it up here. And the absolute best thing about this Kashira is that it's not loose at all. It's something that happens far too often at swords in this price range, is that the Kashira comes loose very quickly, or even comes loose right out of the box. This one I've done a decent amount of cutting with, and it's still nice and tight. The Suka core is a pretty simple shape with basically just straight lines throughout. And again, at this price point, you can't really expect a lot of detail. So there's no wasting or anything here. And honestly, I think that's a good call, because a simple shape is going to have less chance for error. The Ito wrap is cotton, and it's actually extremely tight for this price point, for this price range. Much better than I normally see, and much better than the other Romance of Min katana that I have reviewed. This is something that they've said they're working on to improve, and it is very noticeable here. This is still, it's not a perfect Ito wrap. It can be moved around a little bit, but frankly, they did a good job on how tight this Ito wrap is. It doesn't budge in my hands at all when I'm using it, and it feels really good and secure. So good job on that. The diamonds are relatively decent here. They're not perfect, but they are relatively even and pretty good, pretty well done. That said, there is still room for improvement, especially in the transitions. First off, this knot, while it's oriented correctly, it's huge. It's big and bulky, and it kind of overlaps the Kashira in a bit of an awkward way. It doesn't create any hot spots, but this could use to be improved. One of the ways this can be improved is by carving little divots in the Suka core for the knot to rest in. And then also just better tying of the knot will make it smaller. It's not a big deal, but it's something that could be improved. There's also a very slight ledge right here when transitioning to the Fuchi, where the Fuchi creates a bit of a ledge. It's not much, and if I run my finger on it like this, it doesn't even really feel uncomfortable. I certainly never noticed this when using the sword, so I don't think it's a big enough ledge to cause issues, but it is there, and I figured I would point it out. The Samaegawa underneath the Ito wrap is real, and that's another improvement Romance of Min has made. They used to be using fake Samaegawa, now they're using real, and that's an improvement. I like to see that. The quality of the panels is pretty low, as you would expect, but there are a little bit of variations in nodule size. Again, something that could be improved is the Samegawa could be inlaid into the Suka core. Right now it's glued on top, and it's a small thing, but that's another very minor thing that could be improved. In addition, right here, you can see the wood between the Samegawa and the Fuchi. If the Samegawa is just a little bit longer, that would be hidden. Very minor complaints here. The Menuki are also swirly Mitsudomes, and the casting quality on them is considerably lower than on the Kashira. I can definitely make out less detail on them, but at the same time, I can tell what they are. So that's good. Most of the time, I'm terrible at identifying what the Menuki are supposed to represent. These ones are very slightly loose. If I reach my finger in there, I can move them around a little bit, but it's a very minor amount. And again, it didn't cause any problems when I was using the sword. There are 2 Mikugi on here, and one of them is kind of damaged. It's splintered a little bit, and that's something I think should have been caught in quality control. These are one of the primary things that hold the entire hilt together, so I would prefer not to see a damaged Mikugi on the sword. Luckily, it's not a big deal. I could pretty easily hammer that out and just replace it with another one. The Fuchi has a design that matches the Kashira with no swirly Mitsudomes on here. The casting quality here is a little worse than the Kashira, a little better than the Menuki, but I can see the lines where they cleaned up the casting lines a little bit better. It's not a big deal. At this price point, you're going to get things like that. The best thing about it is, just like the Kashira, there's absolutely no wiggle to it. It is tight, it is right, and it is so good to see on a budget katana because, again, that's something that comes loose entirely too often in my experience. The Tsuba continues that same theme with that Mitsudome and kind of a root-like texture. And one of the things I really like about it is that there's a rim along the edge. Oftentimes you don't see a rim, you just see a flat disc. And it's nice to see, give that extra depth to the design. Now, one thing that's a bit odd about this Tsuba is that the design is exactly the same on both sides. That's not traditional because, generally speaking, you're going to have 2 different designs on each side, and it's this side facing the hilt that is going to be a little bit more elaborate because when you wear the katana, you have the more elaborate look facing out so it can be seen. It's not a big deal, especially at this price point. I'd rather see a well-executed design than something that requires more depth and detail, and then because there's not enough time to do quality control on it, it's going to be less well-executed. I'd rather see a well-executed basic design than a complex design that has flaws. Now that's not to say this doesn't have some flaws. The casting quality here is about the same as the Fuchi. It could be better, it's not a big deal. And it's all very tight, there's no looseness in the Tsuba at all. So again, the entire hilt is tight, there's no looseness anywhere in it, and I am just so happy to see that. The Habaki is fine. I don't like this design etched into it. Personally, I would prefer just a plain Habaki. Other people will probably disagree. I have no idea what this design is supposed to represent. Although there is a swirly Mitsudome. Again, I'm sure Matthew Jensen likes it. Now, the fit, it's okay. It's not great. There's some gaps here, but what do you expect at this price point? The one thing that I think could be improved is that you generally want the Habaki to overlap the spine a little bit. That protects the blade when sheathing and drawing the sword. And here the sword is pretty much flush with the Habaki, so the sword's going to end up getting little bits of scratching and rubbing against the saya, and theoretically that could degrade the sword over time. Very, very minor complaint here. So overall, the Habaki's fine. It's nothing spectacular, but it's fine. And the same could be said for the Seppa. These are your bog standard Longchuan China Seppa, and they work. They're tight, they do the job they're supposed to do, and they don't draw attention to themselves, which is really all I could ask for, honestly. And now for just a moment of shameless self-promotion. Check out my merch store at www.alien2.com, where you can get merch such as a shirt like this one, hydration flask, a variety of things, and 25% of all the profits I receive from that store are donated to the American Cancer Society, so you are helping support the channel and a good cause. And now it's time to talk about the business end, the blade. As always, here's my measurements. This sword is very light at 2 pounds, 2.5 ounces, and the blade is 27.5 inches long. It tapers in both width and thickness, starting at about 1.25 inches wide, gently tapering to a relatively slender 9/10 wide at 24 inches up the blade. The thickness of the spine starts at a beefy 7.3 millimeters, and the spine and the Shinogi G are the same thickness, and it tapers evenly to the geometry change of the Unokubi Zukuri style, where the spine narrows dramatically, and the Shinogi G remains stout and the thickest part of the blade. It ends at about 2.4 millimeters thick through the Kasaki, where the spine flares back out to reinforce the tip. This sword features two different fullers. The bohi, or larger fuller, runs about to the geometry change of the Unokubi Zukuri. It terminates a little bit different at both sides, maybe about a 1 millimeter difference. The sohi, or smaller one, runs almost the entire length of the blade and terminates pretty much at the same spot. These are relatively well done fullers. They are crisp and even. The terminations kind of gently terminate out, maybe not quite as crisply as you would like to see, not a big deal there, and there's not much rippling in them at all. Since this is a through-hardened sword, there is no hamon on it, and I, for one, am very glad there's no fake hamon. I am not a fan of the fake-looking wire-brushed on hamons that you will sometimes see on through-hardened katana, so I'm glad it's not there. The finish on the katana is kind of a satin. It's a pretty shiny satin, but there's a good amount of grind lines still on it. Especially in certain light, I can see grind lines, and they're not in line with the blade oftentimes. They kind of waver around and just kind of wander around a decent amount. It's not really a big problem because this is just a pure aesthetics thing, and like I said earlier, I can forgive aesthetics on such a low-cost sword. Looking down the length of the blade, there's not very much rippling here. There is some on the flat part between the Shinogi G and the spine, but not very much. And the spine itself doesn't really ripple much at all. This is considerably less than I would expect at this price point. Now, the Kasaki does have one kind of odd geometry flaw in it, in that right here, it kind of bulges out a little bit. It's a really odd looking flaw here. It's not going to affect the functionality of the katana at all, so it's not really a functionality problem. It's not really a problem with the katana. It's just kind of odd to me that it didn't get caught in quality control, because it's very noticeable as soon as you look at the Kasaki. I'm going to test the edge now with some paper cutting. As always, my expectation here is for the sword to be able to slice through the paper from the edge, biting into the edge and getting a very clean slice. If it's not able to bite into the edge like that, I will then insert it into the middle of the paper and then draw through and see if it will slice through that way. In my opinion, a sword should be sharp enough for a backyard cutter to be able to slice into the edge of the paper. A lot of production swords fail to do that though. So with all that being said, let's see how this does. So it started the cut there, and then it kind of tore a little bit. Let me go a little bit slower. So up here, it struggled to cut, and then once I got down a little bit more, it did cut quite cleanly and evenly. I'm going to try a few times. I find that a few different times is usually good to really get a sense of the edge. Here's another piece of paper. Let's try again. So pretty much the same thing happened. It didn't really bite in up here, but as soon as I got to right around the end of the fuller, it starts cutting pretty nicely. And then once it got down around here, it did start tearing. I'm going to try starting the cut right near where it looks like it's the sharpest. That time I wasn't really able to get it to start the cut much at all. And that time it was. And this is why I do multiple tests, because it's not always necessarily perfectly consistent. But this sword seems to be sharp enough to bite into paper without being crazy sharp. It's probably a little bit less sharp than I am used to getting with Chinese-made katana, which honestly set the bar very high for sharpness out of the box. Far better than the vast majority of production European swords. So this is maybe slightly less sharp than I would typically see, but it's still very functionally sharp. I did a good amount of cutting with this sword on water bottles, pool noodles, and tatami. With water bottles, it cuts them pretty well. It's not great, but it's effective and a usable backyard cutter for water bottles. It's a little bit duller than I would expect from a katana from Longchuan. In fact, I'm not even sure if I should say it's duller. It's just not quite as sharp as I'm used to seeing. That said, it still cuts water bottles pretty well. Now, I did try some progressively harder targets, going on like a 2-liter bottle, on a big laundry detergent bottle. And that laundry detergent bottle, they're not particularly tough cuts because the plastic is pretty soft. But it can be challenging to get multiple cuts on them because there's not a lot supporting it on my post here. Well, my second cut on this was just bad edge alignment. This is my fault entirely. I don't blame the katana for that at all. I also tried just like this rolled paper container that had some oatmeal in it. This was empty and I batted it around the yard quite a bit. There's pretty much nothing supporting it. There's no weight to it at all. And it was windy that day too, so I had to kind of rush my cuts a little bit. But it just didn't really cut into it very much. I'm not sure how difficult this would be to cut with a sharper sword, but my hunch is because it's so light and paper is not particularly easy to cut, especially if it's got multiple layers like this does. I don't think it's that bad that this didn't cut that. Now, on my very last cut on it, I did manage to get cut into it. It did tear kind of bit, but it did cut in pretty well. And as for pool noodles, it's okay. If I kind of was doing a casual cut, not really cutting with a lot of authority, it didn't cut the noodle at all. It just kind of batted it aside. Whereas if I put more oomph into it, really made sure that the katana was moving quickly, it would cut through the noodle. What my experience is, especially with katana, is I don't need a lot of speed normally to cut pool noodles with katana. Usually they are sharp enough that I can do these more light, casual cuts and it'll slice through. This one, because it is just a little bit not quite as sharp, it didn't really, it didn't correct for the slower speed, the more controlled, casual cuts. I really needed to put, a lot of focus and really move the katana to get it to go through. Lastly, now that the weather is starting to cool off, I was able to cut some tatami. First off, this is not a very good example because this tatami mat is kind of compromised. I had a devil of a time staking it. I found out afterwards that my stake is extending way too high above my stand. But I staked and restaked this tatami mat before finally getting it somewhat on here. But the mat is kind of messed up. You can see the top of it, it's sticking out. It's not a very good mat at this point, but I was determined to not waste the mat, so I was going to cut it some, right? Well, if I was able to get cuts into it. It did cut all the way through, and a few times it only cut partially through. I can't really say too much about the katana here because at this point I was frustrated from trying to stake the tatami, and it kind of wrecked my technique. So, that's something I need to get better at, is not letting frustration mess up my technique. But it did still cut all the way through, and it was, generally speaking, effective if my edge alignment was on. Handling wise, this katana is a lot of fun to move around. It weighs in at 2 pounds, 2.5 ounces, which is quite light for a katana. And that's unsurprising since it is the Anakubi-Zukuri geometry. You know, if you look at the spine, with how thick it starts here, and then when it transitions right here to that much thinner spine, that makes a big difference in reducing the weight of Anakubi-Zukuri katana a lot. It is much lighter than your typical Shinogi-Zukuri katana. And when I move it out there, that extra weight taken off the blade out here definitely results in less blade presence and certainly less authority and weight and feel to the sword out here. That's not to say it doesn't have authority. It does have some blade presence. You can still feel it, but katana with their 2.5 to 3 pounds, very roughly speaking for a Shinogi-Zukuri, on a 26, 27, 28 inch length blade. Again, very generic descriptions here. That much weight in a relatively short blade does tend to mean that they have a lot of blade presence and a lot of oomph in the cut and a lot of authority in the cut. Anakubi-Zukuri kind of reduces that and turns it actually into feeling very light for a two-handed sword. 2 pounds, 2.5 ounces is frankly nothing for a sword that is mostly intended to be used in two hands. You can certainly use katana in one, but from what I know, the majority of the techniques and styles of using it are going to be two-handed. And this feels really good to move around, redirect cuts, and continue cuts, all that kind of thing. It feels really good and is quite fun to move around. However, it doesn't really capture the feel of a katana to me, and that's just kind of because it's an Anakubi-Zukuri. For the longest time I thought Anakubi were my favorite katana just because of how light and nimble they are. But I've started to really appreciate the more Shinogi-Zukuri style, and even the ones without bohi, because it really is the most traditional style of katana. So it's really going to give you the most appropriate handling of what katanas would have handled like historically, what true Nihonto handle like. And with this, it is balanced right there. That's like about 4 inches from the munemache. That's a good place to be. It gives you some authority in the cut, gives you good tip control, but it doesn't make it feel heavy or outlandishly light and nimble either. So one thing I want to mention here is how the Tsuka and the Ito wrap feel in my hands, because that's, I've said before, this is really the most important part of a katana in the budget range, honestly, any range, is how good the grip feels. It's true of not just katana, it's true of all sorts. This is how you interact with the sword. This is where your hands are most of the time. Sure, there's some techniques where you would put your hand on the spine. You can do half sword. That's all beside the point. This is the primary interface for the sword for the user. And if it doesn't feel good, it degrades the experience of the entire sword. And you can look no further than my review 2 weeks ago of the Cold Steel Hand and a Half sword, of how important a good grip is. This is an excellent grip. I am really impressed with Romance of Min here. The Ito, it's not perfectly tight. It can be moved around some, but it feels good. The shape here is good. Everything is rock solid. There's no looseness anywhere. And let me tell you, at $155, that's unusual in a budget katana. I rarely see a katana in this price range that doesn't have a loose fuchi, a loose kashira, a loose piece somewhere, or Ito wrap that is just too loose and just reduces the confidence of gripping the sword. That's not the case here. Everything here feels good, is tight, and does the job it's supposed to do. Sure, the Ito wrap is cotton rather than silk. Sure, the in knot is a little bit bulky and could be slimmed down and improved. But these are pretty minor complaints when you're talking about a $155 sword. This is very well done at this price point. So the first sword I'm going to compare to the Romance of Min Tsurudoy is this Romance of Min custom katana that they also sent me a while ago. You can see the blade lengths are approximately the same, and the suka length is approximately the same also. The custom katana is much more of a traditional Shinogi Zukuri style blade, and I'm going to put the Tsurudoy down for a moment to talk about something kind of interesting about the custom one. So I was just talking about how Shinogi Zukuri tend to be heavier than Unokubi Zukuri. Well, this one is not particularly accurate to that. This weighs 2 pounds, 2.5 ounces, exactly the same as the Tsurudoy. But when I move it out here, it has more blade presence, and it is balanced. Maybe it honestly looks very similarly balanced, maybe a touch further out, but it definitely has more tip feel and tip weight to it. And looking at the spine, I think this one starts a little bit thinner than the Tsurudoy, but I think the main difference in the weight here, not the main difference, they're pretty much the exact same weight. The main reason why a Shinogi Zukuri would weigh about the same there, with relatively similar blade lengths and all that, is this hilt. The Suka core feels lighter. The fake leather wrap here feels a little bit lighter. It doesn't have as bulky of Tsuba or Kashira. There's no Menuki here. There's a lot of little things that are making this hilt more lightweight than you would typically see on a pretty much any katana. So this definitely has more authority in the cut. Not a lot, but I can feel the tip a little bit more. I can redirect motions about the same. Yeah, they feel very, very similar actually, which is kind of odd since this is a very different geometry sword. Let me pick up the Tsurudoy for a moment. Yeah, so this immediately feels like there's more weight back here than up here. I don't know if this is going to get caught on camera. It really doesn't like to focus on this kind of thing, but hopefully you can see that the Tsurudoy is a little bit thicker than the custom katana, and that's what's making that weight, that this feel like it has more weight around here than out here. So my next comparison to the Tsurudoy is the Yari no Hanzo Practical Musashi. If I compare these side by side, hilt length pretty similar, but the Yari no Hanzo looks like it's about 1 to 2 inches longer of a blade. Let me put down the Tsurudoy. So when I picked this up, I immediately thought, this weighs more, it feels heavier. Well, it weighs 2 pounds, just over 3 ounces. So it's not that much heavier, but it is a little bit heavier, and it certainly has more blade presence. Now this is also a Shinogi Zukuri with a bohi, and I didn't really have another katana in this general price range that does not have a bohi to give it a comparison to. I do have one that's a Zisei, but it's a lot more expensive, and then I have a Shang sword that's a Shogu Zukuri, but that one has a whole lot of issues. So this is what I went with. And this has definitely more blade presence, especially because it's a longer blade. That does bring that weight out towards the tip a little bit more. Not a lot. This is an excellent feeling katana, honestly. And I do like moving it around. And one interesting thing here, you've got the Musashi Tsuba on it, which is a very lightweight Tsuba. And with that, combined with the kind of long blade, you would think it would be balanced pretty far out. And it's definitely further out than the Tsurudoy. Looks like it's about 5 inches right around there. But that doesn't mean it feels tip heavy. It doesn't. It definitely has a good maneuverability to it. Definitely usable in 1 or 2 hands. I'm going to pick up the Tsurudoy now. So yeah, again, this one feels like most of the mass is back towards the hilt more than out here. And it just feels a little bit nimbler, a little bit more intuitive of how to move it out there. I feel like it's a little bit more forgiving in terms of just how to move it around, how to redirect cuts, that kind of thing. Whereas the Musashi, the Yari no Hanzo Musashi, feels a lot more typical to what I would consider a normal katana, which is, well, I won't say is unintuitive to use. They're very specific style and feel to katana that is very little like how European swords, which I'm more used to, handle. And I think this is probably a little bit better for a beginner, but at the same time, it's not particularly representative of what katana handle like for the majority of the time. So while it may be better for somebody who is not familiar with swords, at the same time you're going to be learning on something that doesn't really accurately resemble what most katana feel like. So it's kind of not a catch-22, but it's kind of a conundrum there. Do you want the one that feels just absolutely simple and easy to use, or do you want the one that requires just a little bit more attention to detail, a little bit more, you need to pay a little bit more attention to your edge alignment and the way the sword moves around? You know, that's honestly up to the individual, and I'm sure everybody has their own opinion about that. For potential improvements, it's rather hard to identify good ones because, again, this is a budget sword, compromises are going to be made. But I feel like I've identified a few things that I think could have been improved, and even at this price point, I think probably should be improved. So here we go. The first up, I find the sharpness a little lacking. Not a lot, it's functionally sharp, but it's a little bit less than I'm used to for Longchuan katana. And when you consider the listing says that it is extra sharp, that could be improved a little bit. It is certainly less sharp than either of the other two Romance of Min katana I have reviewed. So I know they're capable of delivering very nicely sharpened swords. This one is just a little bit less. Secondly, the saya fit could be a bit better. I don't really consider this too much of a problem because I don't think it would take very much effort at all to file down the koiguchi a little bit, and I think this sword will fit in just fine. Lastly, quality control. And these are very minor things. That one Makugi that is splintered, I think that should have been caught and replaced with a Makugi that was not damaged. The little bulge in the edge at the Kisaki, again, a very minor thing that is not a big deal, but it's quality control that could be improved. Bottom line, this sword retails for $155. What do you get for that price? Well, you get a competently put together Unakubi Zukuri through hardened katana that is pretty light and a lot of fun to move around. It's functionally sharp, could be sharper, and overall just a worthy backyard cutter. It exhibits pretty much none of the very common flaws to Longchuan katanas, such as loose Ito, loose Fuchi, loose Kashira, just lots of little fit and finish issues that degrade the performance of the sword, especially in the hilt. This exhibits none of those. So is it worth that $155 price tag? Yes, I think it is. I'm very happy to say that it is. Romance of Min have sent me several different katana before, and the first two they sent me, I didn't think were worth it. I thought they were getting there, but they weren't there yet. They have, however, been incredibly gracious about feedback and wanting to take that feedback and improve. And it seems to me like they have actually done that. They've improved all those little things that I complain about with budget katana. I think they've improved pretty much all of them and delivered a katana that I think is well worth the asking price. So kudos to Romance of Min for taking constructive criticism and putting it into practice and fixing the flaws that have been identified. Now, I do have to say, this is just one katana. I can't say that this is true for all of them. You know, this is a review sample. Take that with a grain of salt. It's one katana. It could be a fluke that it was put together so well. It could be that a review sample was specially picked to be higher quality control. However, just from my experience with Longchuan sellers, they don't really look at these katana once they're in the box and select them or anything like that. They have a warehouse of completed katana and ship them out. So I don't think that's the case here. I could be wrong, but you know, that's just my opinion. So overall, I want to say thank you to Romance of Men for sending this, but even more kudos to Romance of Men for addressing flaws and trying to improve. It's something that a lot of companies don't do. They will get criticism, constructive criticism, feedback, and either attack the person giving the feedback or just ignore it. Romance of Men, they look like they are actually really legitimately wanting to improve, and I very much applaud that. And that's going to wrap up my review of this Romance of Men Tsurudoi. I want to give a thank you to Romance of Men for sending this sword to me, and I encourage everybody watching to go check out the other reviews that are going to be posted of the Tsurudoi Unsheathed Sword reviews, and Matthew Jensen are both planning to release their reviews either today or very shortly. I put a link in the description to those different channels. Be sure to check them out, and while you're there, hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't, leave a comment, do all the things that YouTube wants you to do to show that this channel deserves to continue to grow. Until next time, Alien Tude out.